Chosen one, there is a battle happening right now and you are at the center of it without knowing it. Forces you cannot see are fighting over your future, your purpose, and the direction of your life, and the outcome will determine everything that enters your next season. Stay with these words, because what you are about to hear will change how you interpret everything happening around you right now. Type Amen in the comments if you believe God is fighting for you right now, even when you cannot see it. You did not land on this video by accident, and what I am about to share is going to show you exactly why. At one of the most confusing seasons of my life, not an obvious crisis, just a silent chaos of good things being blocked, opportunities slipping away, and relationships dissolving without explanation, someone wiser than me said something that reframed everything. You are not doing anything wrong. You are in the middle of a battle. And when the battle is this intense, it means what is being fought over is significant. Drop a like right now. This simple action helps carry this message to another chosen one who needs to hear it today. Nobody fights over something that has no value. Nobody invests energy in a battle over territory that is insignificant, unimportant, or not worth the cost of the conflict. This is a principle that operates as consistently in the spiritual realm as it does in every other arena of life where contest and competition exist. The intensity of the fight is always proportional to the value of what is being fought over. And the chosen one who grasps this principle and applies it honestly to the resistance they are experiencing in their own life will find that the most disorienting reframe available to them is also the most accurate one. The battle around your life is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something significant is in you. The opposition you face, the resistance that seems disproportionate to your circumstances, the doors that close without explanation, the progress that is harder to maintain than it logically should be, none of that is random, and none of it is the universe's indifferent response to an ordinary person living an ordinary life. It is the specific, targeted, strategically calculated response of a force that has assessed what you carry, understood what it will produce if it reaches maturity, and decided that the cost of opposing it is worth paying. The chosen one who understands this stops interpreting resistance as personal failure and starts reading it as confirmation that what is inside them is exactly as significant as God said it was when He placed the calling there in the first place. I spent a long and genuinely painful stretch of my life trying to understand why my experience of resistance seemed so disproportionate to my circumstances, why things that appeared straightforward for other people required so much more effort from me, why progress in areas that felt clearly aligned with my purpose was harder to sustain than progress in areas that felt less essential, why the specific places where I was most invested seemed to attract the most friction, while the areas where I was less committed moved with comparative ease. I tried multiple explanations: that I was making strategic errors, that my faith was insufficient, that I lacked some quality or discipline that would unlock the ease I was watching other people experience. What I could not see from inside the confusion of those years was the explanation that would have changed everything about how I experienced them. The resistance was not a sign that I was doing something wrong. It was a sign that what I was doing was right, specifically dangerously, consequentially right, and that there was a force that understood the implications of my purpose reaching full development better than I did and was responding accordingly. The day I received that reframe was not the day the resistance ended, but it was the day I stopped being confused by it and started being informed by it, and that shift changed everything about how I moved through it. The resistance the chosen one experiences is not generic. It is not the ordinary friction of a difficult world pushing back against any person who is trying to build something meaningful. It is targeted, aimed at the specific areas that, if they advanced, would produce the most significant impact in the most significant number of lives. And this targeting is itself a form of information, because if you pay attention to where the resistance is most concentrated, you will find a map of your most important territories. The area where the opposition is most intense is almost always the area where the potential is most significant, where the gift, if developed, would reach the farthest, where the healing, if completed, would release the most, where the calling, if pursued, would impact the most people in the most lasting ways. The chosen one who learns to read the intensity of the resistance as information about the value of the territory being contested will never again be confused about where to invest their most serious faith and their most serious effort, because the opposition itself will have told them exactly where the most important ground is located. So here is the question that reframes everything, and I want you to sit with it long enough to let it do something to the story you have been telling yourself about the resistance in your life. What if the battle around you is not proportional to who you are today, but to who you are becoming? What if the opposition is not responding to your current capacity, but to your future impact? To what happens when the gift matures, when the calling is fulfilled, when the version of you that is still in development reaches the place of full expression and begins to do what it was designed to do in the world? Because if that is true, and the pattern of Scripture and the pattern of every significant life suggests that it is, then the resistance is not a ceiling on your potential. It is a confirmation of it. The chosen one who receives that truth, who allows it to reframe the battle from evidence of limitation to evidence of significance, will find that the same circumstances that were producing discouragement begin instead to produce a specific, settled, grounded determination that does not depend on the battle being easy in order to continue moving forward. Type 777 if you believe the battle around your life is proof of the greatness inside you. There is a side of this battle that most people completely ignore, and ignoring it is one of the most costly perceptual errors a chosen one can make in the middle of a spiritual conflict. The battle around your life is not only a battle against you, it is a battle for you. And the side that is fighting for you is not a minor force, not an underdog, not an army that needs favorable conditions or numerical superiority to be effective. It is the same force that split the Red Sea when the math of escape was impossible, the same force that shut the mouths of lions when the outcome should have been certain, the same force that called life out of what had been dead long enough that hope had given way to grief. The chosen one who focuses exclusively on what is fighting against them, on the opposition, the obstacles, the closed doors, the people and circumstances that seem to be working against their advancement, will experience their situation as a losing battle, not because they are losing, but because they have trained their attention entirely on one side of a two-sided conflict and drawn conclusions about the outcome based on incomplete information. The most important shift available to the chosen one in the middle of a spiritual battle is not a change in circumstances. It is a change in where they are looking, from what is fighting against them to what is fighting for them, and the recognition that what is fighting for them is categorically more powerful than anything that has been arrayed against them. I spent a significant season of my life so focused on the opposition that I had functionally forgotten about the support. I could describe in exhaustive detail everything that was working against me, every obstacle, every person who was skeptical, every door that had closed, every resource that was unavailable, every circumstance that was misaligned. I had constructed a comprehensive and very convincing case for why my situation was difficult and why the odds were stacked against me. And the case was not inaccurate. Those things were real. What was inaccurate was the conclusion I was drawing from them, because I was calculating the outcome of the battle based only on what I could see on one side, without accounting for what was present on the other. The shift happened gradually and then all at once, a growing awareness that the same God who had been faithful in every previous season of my life was not suddenly uninvolved in this one, that the same force that had moved on my behalf before was still moving, and that my inability to see it clearly from inside the intensity of the battle did not mean it wasn't there. When I changed what I was looking for, I started finding evidence of divine involvement that had been present all along, in the things that didn't happen that should have, in the protection that arrived without announcement, in the doors that stayed closed long enough to redirect me toward better ones. The army that is fighting for the chosen one does not require favorable conditions to be effective, does not require numerical advantage, does not require the enemy to be cooperative or the circumstances to be aligned before it can move. What it requires is a chosen one who does not quit in the middle of the battle, who does not interpret the ongoing nature of the conflict as evidence that the stronger side is losing, and who does not withdraw their trust from the God who is fighting on their behalf simply because the manifestation of that fighting is not yet visible in the natural dimension. The story of Elisha and his servant is one of the most practically instructive moments in all of Scripture for understanding this dynamic, precisely because of what it reveals about the relationship between what is visible and what is actually present. The servant saw the enemy surrounding the city and concluded that they were finished. Elisha saw the same enemy and was untroubled because he was operating with information the servant didn't have, the awareness that the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire, that the protection surrounding them was vastly greater than the threat arrayed against them, and that the apparent vulnerability was an illusion produced by incomplete perception rather than an accurate assessment of the actual situation. The chosen one who prays for that same opening of eyes, who asks God to show them what is actually present on their behalf, will begin to see their situation not as a story of one person against overwhelming odds, but as a story of one person plus the unlimited resources of heaven against a finite opposition that was never going to win this battle. So here is what I want the chosen one to carry forward from this understanding, not as a theological concept to be admired from a distance, but as a practical, daily, moment-by-moment reorientation of where their attention lands when the battle feels most intense, when the pressure increases, when the opposition seems to be gaining ground, when the circumstances are loudly arguing that things are going in the wrong direction. Pause. Not to ignore what is real, not to perform a positivity that you don't genuinely feel, but to deliberately, intentionally redirect your attention from what is visible to what is present. To remind yourself, with the specific words if necessary, that you are not looking at the full picture when you are only looking at the opposition, that the side fighting for you has never lost a battle it committed to winning, that the God who sees the end from the beginning and who placed the calling inside you did not do so without the intention and the means to see it through to its completion. The chosen one who develops this as a practiced discipline, who consistently chooses to look at the full picture rather than only the visible half of it, will navigate the battle with a steadiness and a confidence that cannot be produced by circumstances alone, because it is anchored to something more reliable than what the circumstances are currently showing. The spiritual battle around a chosen one's life is almost never about a single thing, and understanding this is one of the most important pieces of strategic awareness available to someone who is trying to navigate a season of intense spiritual opposition without losing their footing. It operates on multiple fronts simultaneously: identity, relationships, finances, purpose, mental and emotional health, and each front has a specific objective that is not random but precisely calculated. The objective on the identity front is to make you forget who you are and whose you are, to replace the settled, God-given knowledge of your value and your calling with a version of yourself that is defined by what you have lost, what you have failed at, and what the circumstances of your life suggest about your worth. The objective on the relationship front is to isolate you, to remove or damage the connections that speak truth into your life, that carry faith when yours is depleted, and that provide the kind of community that sustains a person through the seasons that cannot be navigated alone. The objective on the purpose front is to produce enough resistance in the specific areas of your calling that you conclude the vision was never real, that the calling was your imagination, and that the responsible thing to do is to scale back to something more manageable and less contested. The chosen one who can see these objectives clearly, who can identify what each front of the battle is specifically designed to produce, has access to a level of strategic clarity that transforms their experience of the conflict from confusing and overwhelming to navigable and purposeful. When I began to map the areas of my life where the resistance was most concentrated and most persistent, the pattern that emerged was not random, and it was not subtle once I had the framework to read it correctly. The resistance was highest in the exact areas that, if they advanced, would position me most significantly for the next level of my calling. The relationships that were most under pressure were the ones that carried the most genuine investment in my growth and the most honest perspective on my blind spots. The opportunities that were most consistently blocked were the ones that would have given me the most direct access to the people and the platforms that my purpose required. The areas of my identity that were most frequently under attack were precisely the areas where a settled, confident, unshakable sense of who I was would have been most dangerous to the opposition, because a chosen one who knows who they are cannot be manipulated through the doubt and the confusion that are the primary weapons of spiritual warfare. The battle was not random. It was a surgical targeting of the specific areas where disruption would produce the maximum impact on my trajectory, and understanding that surgery, understanding the logic of what was being attacked and why, was one of the most clarifying experiences I have ever had in my spiritual life. Pay attention to where the resistance in your life is most disproportionate to the effort you are investing, because disproportionate resistance is one of the clearest signals available about the location of your most valuable territory. When you work consistently in an area and the friction seems to exceed what the circumstances logically justify, when the obstacles are more persistent, more varied, and more creatively constructed than what you would expect from ordinary life difficulty, that is not a sign that you should redirect your energy elsewhere. It is a sign that you are pressing on ground that matters, that the territory you are attempting to advance is significant enough to attract focused opposition, and that continuing to press rather than retreating is exactly what the situation requires. The chosen one who learns to read disproportionate resistance as a marker of valuable territory will never be confused about where to invest their most serious faith and effort, because the intensity of the opposition will consistently point them toward the most important ground in their life, the areas where breakthrough, when it comes, will produce the most significant and most lasting impact on everything that follows. So here is the inventory I'm asking you to take right now, not as a discouraging audit of how many fronts you are currently under pressure on, but as a clarifying map of where your most important territories are located. Where in your life is the resistance most intense, most persistent, and most disproportionate to your effort? What dream, what relationship, what area of calling has been the most consistently difficult to advance despite your genuine investment in it? What part of your identity is most frequently under attack? What truth about who you are and what you carry keeps getting challenged by your circumstances, your internal narrative, or the voices around you? Because each of those areas is not just a place of pressure. It is a place of significance. It is a territory that the opposition has assessed as valuable enough to contest, which means it is a territory that God has designated as important enough to fight for. The chosen one who sees their most contested areas not as evidence of their weakness, but as evidence of the value of what those areas carry, will approach the battle in those specific places with a determination and a faith that the confusion of the conflict alone could never produce. If you can identify the area of your life where the battle has been most intense, type "I see it now" down below. There is a pattern that repeats with remarkable consistency across the stories of people who have walked faithfully through seasons of spiritual opposition into seasons of genuine breakthrough, and recognizing this pattern before you are inside it is one of the most practically valuable pieces of spiritual intelligence available to the chosen one. The pattern is this: the intensity of the battle almost always increases immediately before a significant turning point. Not gradually, not proportionally, dramatically, suddenly, in a way that feels like things are getting worse precisely at the moment when the person has been faithful long enough to reasonably expect them to be getting better. The opposition, sensing that the window for disruption is closing, that the breakthrough is imminent, that the chosen one is closer to the manifestation than at any previous point in the journey, responds by escalating the pressure rather than conceding the territory. It doubles down. It attacks on multiple fronts simultaneously. It produces a concentration of difficulty in a compressed period of time that is designed to accomplish in the final stretch what it could not accomplish during the longer seasons that preceded it, to make the chosen one conclude that the battle is lost at the exact moment when the battle is actually almost over. Understanding this pattern does not make the final stretch easier, but it makes it navigable, because it gives the chosen one a framework for interpreting what they are experiencing that is more accurate than the interpretation the pressure itself is trying to produce. The worst weeks of my life have been, with a consistency that I no longer treat as coincidence, the weeks immediately preceding the most significant turning points in my story. I did not know this at the time. I was inside the intensity without the perspective that only hindsight provides, which meant that I interpreted the escalating pressure as evidence that things were deteriorating rather than as evidence that things were about to shift. I came closer to quitting in those final stretch seasons than in any of the longer, more sustained periods of difficulty that preceded them, precisely because the concentration of pressure in a short period of time produced a cumulative weight that felt qualitatively heavier than anything that had come before. What I know now, looking back at those seasons with the clarity of someone who made it through each of them and experienced what was waiting on the other side, is that the intensity was not arbitrary. It was proportional to how close I was, to how significant the breakthrough was going to be, to how much the opposition needed to stop me in that specific moment, because it understood that if I made it through the next stretch, the territory would be lost. The chosen one who understands this will not be comfortable in those final stretch seasons, but they will be oriented. They will know what the intensity means, and that knowledge alone will make the difference between enduring and quitting. If the battle around your life feels more intense right now than it did 6 months ago, if the pressure seems to be coming from more directions simultaneously than you have experienced before, if the opposition seems more creative and more persistent than what the earlier seasons of your journey required you to navigate, I want you to receive this as information rather than as evidence of deterioration. Increasing intensity in the final stretch before a breakthrough is not a sign that God has stopped fighting on your behalf. It is a sign that the breakthrough is close enough that the opposition has decided to escalate its investment in stopping you, because the window for stopping you is narrowing. The same darkness that feels most suffocating at 3 in the morning is the darkness that immediately precedes the dawn, and the dawn arrives not because the darkness finally exhausted itself, but because the light overcomes it in a moment that cannot be prevented regardless of how intense the darkness became in the hours preceding it. The chosen one who holds onto that truth in the final stretch, who refuses to interpret increasing pressure as deterioration and instead reads it as the opposition's acknowledgement that they are almost out of time, will stand firm long enough to see the manifestation that the pressure was designed to prevent. So here is the practical instruction for the chosen one who is in the middle of a season that feels like the intensity is at its highest point yet. Do not make permanent decisions from inside the temporary experience of peak pressure. Do not conclude that the battle is lost based on how it feels in the most intense moment of it. Do not withdraw from the territory that is under the most pressure precisely because the pressure is highest, because that withdrawal is exactly what the escalation was designed to produce. Instead, recognize the escalation for what it is, the final concentrated effort of an opposition that is running out of time, and respond to it not with retreat, but with the specific, grounded, faith-anchored decision to remain, to keep showing up, to keep advancing in whatever way is available to you, to keep trusting the God who has never lost a battle he committed to winning, even when the experience of the current moment is making a very loud and very convincing argument that this one might be the exception. The chosen one who does not quit in the final stretch will discover, when the breakthrough arrives, that the intensity of the opposition in those last days was the most reliable signal they had that they were closer than they knew. There is a truth that changes everything about how the chosen one experiences spiritual warfare, and the enemy works harder to keep this specific truth hidden than almost any other, because the moment it is genuinely received, not just intellectually acknowledged, but deeply operationally believed, it dismantles the primary weapon that spiritual opposition relies on most heavily. The truth is this: the battle has already been won. Not is being won. Not will be won if you hold on long enough and faith hard enough. Already won, past tense, completed, settled, decreed before the current conflict ever began in your experience. The outcome of the battle around your life is not in question. It was not in question when the opposition started. It was not in question at any point during the conflict. And it is not in question now, regardless of how the current circumstances are presenting themselves or how convincingly the pressure of the moment is arguing for a different conclusion. The chosen one who receives this truth does not become passive or indifferent to the battle. They become something far more dangerous to the opposition than someone who is fighting anxiously for a victory they are not sure they will achieve. They become someone who is advancing from a position of settled certainty about the outcome, and that posture produces a quality of forward movement that no amount of external pressure can sustainably interrupt. When I genuinely internalized the difference between fighting for victory and fighting from victory, my entire posture in the spiritual battle changed in ways that were immediately perceptible to everyone around me, even before the external circumstances had shifted at all. The anxiety that had characterized my engagement with the conflict began to be replaced by something quieter and more grounded. Not the false peace of someone who is in denial about the reality of what they are facing, but the specific steadiness of someone who has separated the question of what is happening from the question of how it is going to end, and has received absolute clarity on the second question, even while the first remains unresolved. My language changed. I stopped speaking about the battle in terms that assumed an uncertain outcome, and started speaking about it in terms that reflected what I actually believed about who was going to win. My decision-making changed. I stopped making choices from the defensive crouch of someone who is trying to avoid losing, and started making choices from the confident posture of someone who is determining how to steward the victory that is already assured. The chosen one who makes this shift does not experience a more comfortable battle. They experience a completely different relationship with the same battle, one that is anchored to truth rather than to the feeling of the moment. The enemy's only real power over the chosen one, who understands that the battle is already won, is the power of deception, specifically the power to convince you to quit before the manifestation of the victory that has already been decreed. He cannot change the outcome. He cannot reverse the verdict. He cannot rewrite the story that has already been determined by a power infinitely greater than his own. What he can do is work on your perception of the story while you are still inside it, making the unresolved middle feel like the final chapter, making the delay between the decree and the manifestation feel like evidence that the decree was never real, making the intensity of the current conflict feel like an argument against the certainty of the outcome that was settled before the conflict began. The chosen one who understands this will never again experience spiritual opposition with the same level of existential anxiety, because they will have identified the mechanism, the deception about the outcome, and refuse to give it the agreement that it needs to produce its intended effect. You cannot be defeated in a battle that was already won. You can only be convinced to stop before you see the manifestation, and conviction is the only weapon the enemy has left. So receive this truth now, not as a motivational statement designed to make you feel better about a difficult situation, but as an accurate description of the actual spiritual reality of your life. The battle around you has an outcome that is not in question, a victor that has already been determined, and a manifestation that is coming regardless of how the current moment feels. Your task is not to secure the victory. It is to remain standing until the victory that is already secured becomes visible in the natural dimension. Keep moving, keep trusting, keep advancing in whatever territory is available to you. Keep refusing the invitation to interpret the ongoing nature of the conflict as evidence that the stronger side might be losing. The chosen one who stays in position long enough to see the manifestation of what was already decreed will look back on the battle not as the season when everything was uncertain, but as the season when they learned to live from the certainty of what God had already settled, and that learning will carry them through every subsequent battle with a faith that the first battle alone could never have produced. Positioning in the middle of a spiritual battle is not primarily about exerting more effort, praying longer prayers, or generating a more intense emotional experience of faith that you hope will tip the scales in your favor. It is about knowing where to stand, what to say, and where to direct your focus when the pressure is at its maximum and the temptation to react from the emotion of the moment is at its strongest. The chosen one who is well positioned in a spiritual battle is not necessarily the one who is working the hardest or feeling the most. They are the one who has learned to maintain their post when everything around them is arguing that abandoning it would be the reasonable response. Positioning means refusing to be moved from what you know to be true by what you currently feel to be overwhelming. It means keeping your confession aligned with the outcome that has already been decreed, rather than with the circumstances that are currently visible. It means continuing to advance in whatever territory is available to you, even when every step seems to cost more than the previous one, and when the resistance makes simple progress feel like a significant accomplishment. The chosen one who understands positioning understands that their most important contribution to the battle is not their strength, but their persistence, the decision, made daily and sometimes hourly, to remain in the place where God stationed them, rather than retreating to the more comfortable ground of a smaller life. I learned what correct positioning in a spiritual battle actually looks like, not through instruction, but through the specific education of having gotten it wrong repeatedly before I understood what right looked like. Wrong positioning, in my experience, looked like allowing the intensity of the battle to dictate the quality of my confession, speaking about my situation in the language of the pressure rather than the language of the promise, which consistently reinforced the experience of the pressure rather than creating the spiritual atmosphere in which the promise could manifest. It looked like abandoning my routine of communion with God in the seasons when I felt least connected, least heard, and least certain that the communion was producing anything, which meant that the seasons when I most needed the anchor of consistent spiritual practice were the seasons when I was least likely to maintain it. And it looked like isolating myself from the people who carried faith for my situation when I was running low on my own, because the vulnerability of admitting that I was struggling felt more costly in the moment than the cost of navigating the battle without the support that community provides. Each of these positioning errors compounded the difficulty of the battle without changing its ultimate outcome, but they made the journey through it significantly longer and significantly more painful than it needed to be. Correct positioning in the middle of a spiritual battle expresses itself in 3 specific practices that I have found to be the most practically sustaining through the most intense seasons of conflict. The first is guarding your words, refusing to speak declarations of defeat over a battle whose outcome has already been determined, because words are not neutral in the spiritual realm, and what you consistently say about your situation creates an atmosphere that either supports or undermines the manifestation of what God has already decreed. The second is maintaining consistency in your spiritual practice, especially when you feel nothing, because the seasons of felt absence are precisely when the discipline of continued communion with God produces the deepest roots in your faith rather than the shallowest. The third is surrounding yourself with people who can see what you are fighting, to see when your own vision is obscured by the intensity of the conflict, people who will remind you of the truth about the outcome when the circumstances are making a very convincing argument for a different conclusion. These 3 practices do not remove the battle, but they keep the chosen one standing inside it, which is the only position from which the breakthrough can be received. You are not trapped in this battle, you are passing through it, and the distinction between those 2 experiences is one of the most important the chosen one can make about their current season. Trapped implies no exit, no forward movement, no destination on the other side of the current difficulty. Passing through implies exactly the opposite, that there is ground ahead of you, that the current territory is not your permanent address, that the conflict you are navigating has a far side that exists and is reachable and is worth every step it costs to get there. The chosen one who holds this truth, who refuses to treat the middle of the journey as if it were the end, who insists on the reality of the other side even when it is not yet visible, who advances through the battle with the posture of someone who is in transit rather than someone who is stuck, will arrive at the breakthrough not depleted and barely surviving, but formed and grounded and genuinely ready for what the other side requires of them. In the middle of a battle, the most counterintuitive instruction that exists is also the most powerful. Be still and see the salvation of the Lord. Not passive stillness, not the stillness of someone who has given up and is waiting for whatever comes. The active, faith-filled stillness of someone who has identified what is theirs to do and what belongs to God, and has made the deliberate decision to do their part with excellence while trusting God completely with His. The chosen one's part is obedience, faithfulness, forward movement, and the refusal to quit before the manifestation. God's part is fighting, winning, and manifesting the outcome that was already decreed before the battle began. When the chosen one tries to do God's part, when they carry the weight of fighting a battle that was never theirs to win through human effort, they exhaust themselves against a resistance that their own strength was never designed to overcome. But when they focus entirely on their part, doing it with consistency and with faith, they create the conditions in which God can do His part in ways that exceed anything human effort could have produced. Release the weight of the battle that does not belong to you. Continue faithfully in what does. And trust the God who has never lost a battle. He committed to winning, to do what only He can do, in your situation, in your timing, and in a way that will make the story of this season one of the most powerful testimonies you will ever carry. Chosen one, the battle is real, what is being fought over is significant, and the side fighting for you has already won. Every pressure, every resistance, every front of simultaneous attack is not evidence of abandonment. It is confirmation that what you carry is worth fighting over. Close your eyes and say it out loud. God, I trust you with every battle in my life right now. I will not quit before the manifestation. The battle is already won, and I receive that truth today. Amen. If this reached you today, it wasn't by accident. Drop a like. It helps this word find another chosen one who needs to know that the battle around their life is proof of the greatness inside them. Subscribe and turn on the bell. What's coming next is for those ready to stand firm, advance with purpose, and receive every victory that heaven has already prepared. One word. Tell me what you felt. I read every single one.